Chapter 3. Up the Faraway Tree. The children did not tell their father and mother about the happenings in the Enchanted Wood, for they were so afraid that they might be forbidden to go there. But when they were alone they talked about nothing else. "When do you suppose we could go up the Faraway Tree?" Franny kept asking. "Oh, do let's go, Joe." Joe wanted to go very badly, but he was a little afraid of what might happen, and he knew that he ought to look after his two sisters and see that no harm came to them. Just suppose they all went up the Faraway Tree and never came back. Then he had an idea. "Listen," he said. "I know what we'll do. We'll climb up the tree and just see what is at the top. We don't need to go there, we can just look. We'll wait until we have a whole day to ourselves, then we'll go." The girls were so excited. They worked hard in the house hoping that their mother would say they could have the whole day to themselves. Joe worked hard in the garden, too, clearing away all the weeds. Their parents were very pleased. "Would you like to go to the nearest town and have a day there?" asked Mother, at last. "No, thank you," said Joe, at once. "We've had enough of towns, Mother. What we'd really like is to go and have a whole-day picnic in the wood." "Very well," said Mother. "You can go tomorrow. Father is going off for the day to buy some things we need. And I have things to do here in the cottage. So, as I'll be close by, you can take your lunch and dinner and go off by yourselves, if it is fine and sunny." How the children hoped the day would be fine. They woke early and jumped out of bed. They pulled their curtains open and looked out. The sky was as blue as cornflowers. The sun shone between the trees, and the shadows lay long and dewy on the grass. The Enchanted Wood stood dark and mysterious behind their garden. They all had breakfast, then Mother cut sandwiches and put them in a bag along with 3 cakes each. She sent Joe to pick some plums from the garden and told Beth to take 2 bottles of lemonade. The children were most excited. Father set off to town, and the children waved goodbye to him from the gate. Then they tore off indoors to get the bag in which their food had been put. They said goodbye to their mother and slammed the cottage door. Our adventures were in the air that morning. Up the Faraway Tree, Joe, Beth and me, sang Franny loudly. "Hush," said Joe. "We are not far from the Enchanted Wood. We don't want anyone to know what we're going to do." They ran down the back garden and out of the little gate at the end. They stood still in the overgrown, narrow lane and looked at one another. It was the first big adventure of their lives. What were they going to see? What were they going to do? They jumped over the ditch and into the wood. At once they felt different. Magic was all around them. The birds' songs sounded different. The trees once again whispered secretly to one another, "Wisha, wisha, wisha, wisha." "Ooh," said Franny, shivering with delight. "Come on," said Joe, going down the green path. "Let's find the Faraway Tree." They followed him. He went on until he came to the oak tree under which they had sat before. There were the 6 toadstools too, on which the elves had held their meeting, though the toadstools looked rather brown and old now. "Which is the way now?" said Beth, stopping. None of them knew. They set off down a little path, but they soon stopped, for they came to a strange place where the trees stood so close together that they could go no farther. They went back to the oak tree. "Let's go this other way," said Beth, so they set off in a different direction. But this time they came to a curious pond, whose waters were pale yellow and shone like butter. Beth didn't like the look of the pond at all, and the 3 of them went back once more to the oak tree. "This is too bad," said Franny, almost crying. "Just when we've got a whole day to ourselves we can't find the tree." "I'll tell you what we'll do," said Joe suddenly. "We'll call those elves. Don't you remember how they said they would help us whenever we wanted them?" "Of course," said Franny. "We had to stand under this oak tree and whistle 7 times. "Go on, Joe, whistle," said Beth. So Joe stood beneath the thick green leaves of the old oak and whistled loudly 7 times. The children waited. In about half a minute a rabbit popped its head out of a nearby rabbit hole and stared at them. "Who do you want?" said the rabbit, in a furry sort of voice. The children stared in surprise. They had never heard an animal speak before. The rabbit put his ears up and down and spoke again, rather crossly. "Are you deaf? Who do you want?" I said. "We want one of the elves," said Joe, finding his tongue at last. The rabbit turned and called down his hole, "Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers. There's someone wanting you." There came a voice shouting something in answer, and then one of the 6 elves squeezed out of the rabbit hole and stared at the children. "Sorry to be so long," he said. "One of the rabbit's children has the measles, and I was down seeing to it." "I didn't think rabbits got the measles," said Beth, astonished. "They more often get the weasels," said Mr. Whiskers. "Weasels are even more catching than measles, as far as rabbits are concerned." He grinned as if he had made a huge joke, but as the children had no idea that weasels were savage little animals that caught rabbits, they didn't laugh. "We wanted to ask you the way to the Faraway Tree," said Beth. "We've forgotten it." "I'll take you," said Mr. Whiskers, whose name was really a very good one, for his beard reached his toes. Sometimes he trod on it, and this jerked his head downwards suddenly. Beth kept wanting to laugh, but she thought she had better not. She wondered why he didn't tie it round his waist out of the way of his feet. Mr. Whiskers led the way between the dark trees. At last he reached the trunk of the enormous faraway tree. "Here you are," he said. "Are you expecting someone down it today?" "Well, no," said Joe. "We rather wanted to go up it by ourselves." "Go up it by yourselves," said Mr. Whiskers, in horror. "Don't be silly. It's dangerous. You don't know what might be at the top. There's a different place almost every day." "Well, we're going," said Joe firmly, and he set his foot against the trunk of the tremendous tree and took hold of a branch above his head. "Come on, girls. I shall fetch my brothers and get you down," said Mr. Whiskers, in a fright, and he scuttled off, crying. "It's so dangerous. It's so dangerous." "Do you suppose it is all right to go?" asked Beth, who was usually the sensible one. "Come on, Beth," said Joe impatiently. "We're only going to see what's at the top. Don't be a baby." "I'm not," said Beth, and she and Franny hauled themselves up beside Joe. "It doesn't look very difficult to climb. We'll soon be at the top." But it wasn't as easy as they thought, as you will see. Chapter 4. The Folk in the Faraway Tree. Before very long the children were hidden in the branches as they climbed upwards. When Mr. Whiskers came back with 5 other elves, not a child could be seen. "Hey, come down," yelled the elves, dancing round the tree. "You'll be captured or lost. This tree is dangerous." Joe laughed and peered down. The faraway tree seemed to be growing acorns just where he was, so he picked one and threw it down. It hit Mr. Whiskers on the hat, and he rushed away, shouting, "Oh, something's hit me. Something's hit me." Then there was silence. "They've gone," said Joe, laughing again. "I expect they don't much like when it rains acorns, funny little things. Come on, girls. This must be an oak tree if it grows acorns," said Beth, as she climbed. But just as she said that she stared in surprise at something nearby. It was a prickly chestnut case, with hard nuts inside. "Good gracious," she said. "It's growing horse chestnuts just here. What a very peculiar tree." "Well, let's hope it will grow apples and pears higher up," said Franny, with a giggle. "It's a most extraordinary tree." Soon they were quite high up. When Joe parted the leaves and tried to see out of the tree, he was amazed to find that he was far higher than the tallest tree in the wood. He and the girls looked down on the top of all the other trees, which looked like a broad green carpet below. Joe was higher up than the girls. Suddenly he gave a shout. "I say, girls. Come up here by me, quickly. I've found something odd." Beth and Franny climbed quickly up. Why, it's a window in the tree, said Beth, in astonishment. They all peered inside, and suddenly the window was flung open, and an angry little face looked out, with a nightcap on. Rude creatures, shouted the angry little man, who looked like a pixie. Everybody that climbs the tree peeps in at me. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, there's always someone peeping. The children were too astonished to do anything but stare. The pixie disappeared and came back with a jug of water. He flung it at Beth and soaked her. She gave a scream. Perhaps you won't peep into other people's houses next time, said the pixie with a grin, and he slammed his window shut again and drew the curtain. Well, said Beth, trying to wipe herself dry with her handkerchief. What a rude little man. We'd better not look in at any windows we pass, said Joe. But I was so surprised to see a window in the tree. Beth soon got dry. They climbed up again, and soon had another surprise. They came to a broad branch that led to a yellow door set neatly in the big trunk of the faraway tree. It had a little door knocker, and a brightly polished bell. The children stared at the door. I wonder who lives there, said Franny. Shall we knock and see, said Joe. Well, I don't want water all over me again, said Beth. We'll ring the bell, and then hide behind this branch, said Joe. If anyone thinks he is going to throw water at us, he won't find us. So Joe rang the bell, and then they all hid carefully behind a big branch. A voice came from the inside of the door. I'm washing my hair. If that's the butcher, please leave a pound of sausages. The children stared at one another and laughed. It was odd to hear of butchers coming up the faraway tree. The voice shouted again, if it's the oil man, I don't want anything. If it's the red dragon, he must call again next week. Good gracious, said Beth, looking rather frightened. The red dragon. I don't like the sound of that. At that moment the yellow door opened, and a small fairy looked out. Her hair was fluffed out round her shoulders, drying, and she was rubbing it with a towel. She stared at the peeping children. Did you ring my bell? She asked. What do you want? We just wanted to see who lived in the funny little treehouse, said Joe, peering in at the dark room inside the tree. The fairy smiled. She had a very sweet face. Come in for a moment, she said. Because of my silky hair. Where are you off to? We are climbing the faraway tree to see what is at the top, said Joe. Be careful you don't find something horrid, said Silky, giving them each a chair in her dark little tree room. Sometimes there are delightful places at the top of the tree, but sometimes there are strange lands too. Last week there was the land of Hippity Hop, which was dreadful. As soon as you got there, you had to hop on one leg, and everything went hippity hop, even the trees. Nothing ever kept still. It was most tiring. It does sound exciting, said Beth. Where's our food, Joe? Let's ask Silky to have some. Silky was pleased. She sat there brushing her beautiful golden hair and ate sandwiches with them. She brought out a tin of pop cakes, which were lovely. As soon as you bit into them they went pop. And you suddenly found your mouth filled with new honey from the middle of the little cakes. Franny took 7, one after another, for she was rather greedy. Beth stopped her. You'll go pop if you eat any more, she said. Do a lot of people live in this tree? Asked Joe. Yes, lots, said Silky. They move in and out, you know. But I'm always here, and so is the angry pixie, down below. Yes, we've seen him, said Beth. Who else is there? There's a Mr. What's-his-name above me, said Silky. Nobody knows his name, and he doesn't know it himself, so he's called Mr. What's-his-name. Don't wake him if he's asleep. He might chase you. Then there's Dame Washalot. She's always washing, and as she pours her water away down the tree, you've got to look out for waterfalls. This is such an interesting and exciting tree, said Beth, finishing her cake. Joe, I think we ought to go now, or we'll never get to the top. Goodbye, Silky. We'll come and see you again one day. Do, said Silky. I'd like to be friends. They all left the dear little round room in the tree and began to climb once more. Not long after they heard a peculiar noise. It sounded like an aeroplane throbbing and roaring. But there can't be an aeroplane in this tree, said Joe. He peered all round, and then he saw what was making the noise. A funny old gnome sat in a deck chair on a broad branch, his mouth wide open, his eyes fast shut, snoring hard. It's Mr. What's-his-name, said Beth. What a noise he makes. Mind we don't wake him. Shall I put a cherry in his mouth and see what happens? Asked Joe, who was always ready for a bit of mischief. The faraway tree was now growing cherries all around for a change, and there were plenty to pick. No, Joe, no, said Beth. You know what Silky said, he might chase us. I don't want to fall out of the faraway tree and bump down from bough to bough, if you do. So they all crept past old Mr. What's-his-name, and went on climbing up and up. For a long time nothing happened except that the wind blew in the tree. The children did not pass any more houses or windows in the tree, and then they heard another noise, rather a peculiar one. They listened. It sounded like a waterfall, and suddenly Joe guessed what it was. It's Dame Washalot throwing out her dirty water, he yelled. Look out, Beth. Look out, Franny. Down the trunk of the tree poured a lot of blue, soapy water. Joe dodged it. Franny slipped under a broad branch. But poor old Beth got splashed from head to foot. How she shouted. Joe and Franny had to lend her their handkerchiefs. I'm so unlucky, sighed Beth. That's twice I've been soaked today. Up they went again, passing more little doors and windows, but seeing no one else, and at last they saw above them a vast white cloud. Look, said Joe, in amazement. This cloud has a hole in it, and the branches go up, and I believe we're at the very top of the tree. Shall we creep through the cloud hole, and see what land is above? Let's, cried Beth and Franny, so up they went. That's the end of these chapters, and don't forget to hit the like button, and hit the subscribe for more books like this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next chapters.